That was a long time ago. My family moved into a small town in central Mass, and we started attending a church in this typical small New England community. And it was a typical small New England church with typical New England people sitting in the pews. And we were newcomers. And we were welcomed, and it felt good. A young couple with a young child, invited into the church and made to feel welcome. They were friendly and hospitable people. But what we noticed after a short time in that community is that this friendliness inside the church didn't necessarily extend beyond the church doors. After church, we would often stop in at the town's only store to grab a sandwich or get something for lunch. And when we saw those people who were so friendly to us in church, they wouldn't acknowledge that they even knew us, some of them, in the store. It was a really odd experience. Well, we learned that in this particular town, there was a particular disdain, I guess, for newcomers. There was this old-timer versus newcomer kind of attitude in the community. And anyone who moved in, we were there 11 years, we never became anything but newcomers in this town. But it bothered me because these were churchgoers. These were Christians who had the love of Christ in their hearts. And yet, when they saw us outside of church, until later, we became friendly on a social level with some of them. But initially, there was this sense of separation that we felt. It was as if they had two sides, the in-church side, the out-of-church side, the loving side, and the prejudiced against newcomers side, the Christian side, and the not-so-Christian side. But if we're honest with ourselves, don't we all have those two sides? When you think about it, the good side and the not-so-good side, aren't we often in a battle between goodness and sin, love for others, selfish concern for ourselves, obedience to God, or sinful rebellions against Him? Don't we have that? This morning, as we continue with our Places in the Bible sermon series, we're going to look at the city of Shechem. Now, that's not a name you hear a lot, but the fact is that it's in the Bible a lot, and it's going to take us a while to get through it all. And it's an important place because a lot of stuff happened there. And those things that happened there provide us with pretty clear examples of man's dual nature of goodness. No, this hand. Goodness and sin. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Let's start with talking about where and what Shechem was. Located about 30 miles north of Jerusalem, there's a map, should be a map on the screen now that shows you, oh, did we not show the title page? Could you go back and show the title page? That is the old and the new. Okay, next screen. On the screen there's a map of where Shechem is located. It's about 30 miles north of Jerusalem. It was an ancient city, believed to have been settled about 6,000 years ago. And it was an important city because of its location on both an east-west and a north-south traveling trade route that went down along the Mediterranean. It passed through a gap between two mountains right at that spot. And so everyone who wanted to go either north or south or east or west had to pass through there. So here's a photo of showing its location between these two mountains. Next slide, please. Mount Gerizim is on the left and Mount Ebal is on the right. Now the word Shechem means shoulders. And doesn't it look like a pair of shoulders with this little town, not little town anymore, but at the time, small town in between the two shoulders. Now it's funny because we're talking today about the good and the evil, and the thought of shoulders makes me think of those old cartoons with Sylvester the cat and others where the angel would sit on one shoulder and the devil on the other, and the angel would say, "Oh, you can't do that," and the devil, "Oh, you can do that. Yes, you can," and go back and forth. And isn't it like that for us sometimes? Isn't it like that for us? So, today the city is called Nablus, Nablus, and it incorporates within it, just as last week with Jericho, it incorporates the ancient Shechem, which was destroyed several times over its long history. The last time was in 72 AD, during that time that the Romans were destroying Judea and Israel. Nablus today, which is in Palestinian territory, and has a population of about 126,000, surrounds the remains of that ancient city. And here's a picture that shows that ancient city within the city that surrounds it, the modern city that surrounds it. The city also contains several other important historic sites, which we'll look at as we go through the references to Shechem in the Bible. Now, Shechem goes way back in the Bible, all the way back to Genesis 12. God had told Abraham to leave Ur, and he went with his father and his family to Haran, and they stopped in Haran, and they lived there for a number of years. But then God tapped Abraham on the shoulder again and said, "Okay, it's time to move along, and I'm going to take you to the promised land." So Abram, he wasn't Abraham yet, he was called Abram at that point, he headed south to travel to the new land to become the father of a great nation. So let's look at verses 6 and 7 of Genesis 12. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And that was it for that particular reference. It became immediately a place of worship for Abram, for God was protecting him. We next see Shechem in Genesis 33, 21 chapters later. And Abraham's grandson now, Jacob, is moving back to Canaan after living for 20 years in Haran, where he went to marry Rachel and Leah. And you remember we talked about that 2 weeks ago in the context of Bethlehem. So on the way back from Haran to Bethel, his family home, he stopped in Shechem with his family. Genesis 33:18 says, "After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel." That means mighty is the God of Israel. El Elohe Israel. So Jacob and his family made this move to Shechem, and they made their home there for a while before continuing on to Bethel. Today there are no sites in Nablus marking where Jacob built that altar or where his family lived, but there is a well that's called Jacob's Well. Even though the Bible at this point does not reference a Jacob's Well, It doesn't say that he stayed and made a well. But it does mention a Jacob's well in the New Testament, which we'll talk about later. So here's a picture of a Greek Orthodox church that was built over Jacob's well and is still there today. And here's a picture of the well inside that church, still called Jacob's well. So we see that Shechem in these early days was a place of worship, a place of thanksgiving, where both Abraham and Jacob built altars to their Lord. Unfortunately, it didn't stay that way. In the very next chapter, the son of Hamor, the king of Shechem, and the son's name was Shechem. Apparently, Hamor named his son after the city. So Shechem raped the daughter of Jacob, Dinah. And then, after that had happened, he decided he was in love with her. And he asked the family of Jacob if he could marry her. Well, Jacob, for some reason, plays a back seat in this whole thing. He lets two of his sons deal with that other family, the family of Hamor and Shechem. He lets them make all the decisions, and they agree to the marriage. But first, because they are circumcised by order from God, they said all the males of Shechem would have to also be circumcised before the marriage could take place. So Hamor and his son Shechem agree, believing that by marrying Dinah, they will get all of Jacob's livestock and property as their own. Kind of greedy. I wonder how much love really was involved. Well, Jacob's sons had another idea. The Shechemite males were circumcised, and then verses 25 and 28 to 29 tell us, while all of them were still in pain, Dinah's brothers took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in their houses. Well, I would say that this is not exactly a scenario that God would approve of. Probably not. Not the rape of Dinah, of course, but also not the subsequent raping, in effect, of this city of Shechem. It was a massacre. This is the first of the evil that we see in Shechem in the Bible, but it isn't the last of the evil. It continues the next time we see Shechem in the Bible, in Genesis 37. Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but first a couple of other things. In Genesis 37, the family is now living in Bethel. And Joseph is the second youngest son of Jacob. So this is all still in the story of Jacob. Now, Joseph, you remember, had two dreams. And in his dreams, his brothers bowed to him, and even his father bowed to him. And he told the brothers of those dreams. And the brothers became extremely angry with him. So one day the brothers were up in the area of Shechem, and they were feeding their flocks up there. They were grazing. And verse 8 says, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him. Okay, so I jumped ahead a little. So the brothers are up in Shechem, grazing their flocks. And you know the story. His father asked him to go and check on them up there, I guess to make sure everything was okay. And as soon as he showed up, his brothers decided because of their anger and hatred toward him, that they would throw him into a dry well, a cistern, and leave him there to die. And then they had second thoughts. Why just let him die? Why not make some money off him? So they pulled him up out of the well, and they sold him to a caravan of Midianites traveling down the road by Shechem through this old trade road down to Egypt to be sold as a slave. A few chapters later, I'm jumping again. So evil strikes again in the area of Shechem. So 400 years later, in the book of Joshua, we see Shechem come up again. The Israelites are moving into the promised land after escaping from slavery in Egypt, when the land is divided up among the 12 tribes of Israel. And the city of Shechem is given to the tribe of Ephraim. A few chapters after that, God instructs the Israelites to set aside several cities of refuge where people who have unintentionally killed someone can run to escape vengeance from the family of the person. So there were cities of refuge all around the new promised land. And Shechem was chosen as a city of refuge. And then a short time later, God instructed that the Israelites should select certain cities to be the cities of the Levites. The Levites, you recall, descendants of Levi, were assigned by God to work exclusively in the tabernacle and later the temple. And from the Levites, all those in the line of Aaron would be priests to God in the tabernacle and later the temple. So they selected cities for the Levites to live in, and Shechem was chosen as one of those cities. So Shechem now is a city of refuge, a city of safety, a city of peace, and a city of worship. The last time Shechem is mentioned in the book of Joshua, Joshua has become an old man, and he assembles all the tribes of Israel at Shechem to remind them of all that God had told them during the Exodus, the 40 years in the wilderness, and the time after that as they entered the promised land, to remind them of God's laws and rules and regulations and expectations for them. And he said to them, "It is now time to throw away any idols and false gods that you have carried with you from Egypt and from your ancestors." And they all did that. Of course, I wonder why after more than 40 years under God, having been told again and again and again to get rid of their idols, they were still carrying them. But some were. And so they threw those idols away. In Joshua 24, verses 25 and 26 say, "On that day Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord." On your screen now will be a picture of what is believed to be the stone that Joshua set up on that day under an oak that's obviously not there anymore. Joshua died soon after this and was buried about 15 miles southwest of Shechem. But about the same time, Joseph's bones, which had been brought up from Egypt at his request. When he died, he had asked that his bones be brought back to his homeland. And at that request, his bones were buried in Shechem. So here's a picture of the outside of the tomb which today marks where Joseph's grave is believed to be, and inside is I don't know what you'd call it. Show the next picture. If you'd show the next picture, please. Thank you. Is a ossuary, but a big one with the bones inside of it. So that's pretty fascinating. There's a lot in Shechem, obviously. So that's where Shechem was at this point in the history of the Jews. It was, again, a place of honor, a place of safety and security, a place of love and peace. And Joseph was buried there. But evil and sin continued to plague Shechem as time went on. We go into the book of Judges, and the book of Judges covers a span of 400 years after the Israelites had come into the Promised Land and before the first king, King Saul, was appointed by God. And the judges, as you may recall, there was one and another and another and another over the span of these 400 years, and they were military leaders, or they were leaders of tribes and communities, and they were the leaders that God assigned to do work on his behalf with the people. The only problem was they weren't all very good people. So in the time of Judges, we have a story about Abimelech. Abimelech is the son of Gideon. Do you remember Gideon? He led the army, and we know Gideon's fleece is the big story where he doubted God and he challenged God. If God really wanted him to go out and defeat the enemy, could he put water, make it wet on top of the fleece at night, but not on the land around it? And he woke up in the morning and the fleece was wet, but the land was not. But Gideon wasn't convinced yet. And so he said, okay, God, I see you can do that, but can you do it the other way around? Can you make the land wet but the fleece dry? And so he went to bed that night, and when he woke up in the morning, the fleece was dry and the land around it, the ground around it was wet. And so he said, okay, I'll go to war, which he had been instructed to do by God. Well, here Abimelech, who was the son of Gideon, Gideon is no longer in the picture, but he had 71 sons, and one of them was from a concubine, so he was only a half-brother to the other 70. Obviously, he had more than one wife. Well, Gideon was hungry for the crown. Abimelech, rather. Gideon had refused the crown. He would not be a king. But Abimelech was hungry for the crown. And he thought that if he was the only heir to Gideon, that he might be able to get the crown. And so he killed 70 of his half-brothers, leaving only one alive. And then the Shechemites crowned him their king. And Abimelech achieved what he wanted to achieve, to become king of Shechem. Well, a battle ensued, and the battle ended with Abimelech's army destroying the city, because there were some in the city who didn't want this to happen, and so they put up resistance. And Abimelech went after them. And he ended up destroying the city and burning 1,000 men and women alive inside the ruins, inside the tower at Temple El Bereth. And here's a picture of those ruins today, of where that tower and that temple were destroyed. While Abimelech was later killed, he attacked another city, the city of Thebez, and attempted to set that city's tower on fire. But a woman had fled to the top of the tower, and she dropped a millstone onto Abimelech's head, and it cracked his skull. And Judges 9:54 says, hurriedly, Abimelech called to his armor bearer, draw your sword and kill me, so that they can't say a woman killed him. So his servant ran him through, and he died. And then I love the next verse, verse 55, because it tells us just how dedicated his army was to him. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. I just love that. The final story of Shechem in the Old Testament is in the book of 1 Kings, and it's also one of good and evil. This is after God had appointed kings, and the time of the judges was gone. Saul had been king, and David had been king, and now David had turned the throne over to Solomon, one of his sons. And Solomon, he wanted to be a king just like his dad. Well, Rehoboam, it's a hard name to say, Rehoboam, no, I'm sorry. Solomon was turning over the throne to Rehoboam, his son. So Solomon had finished his time. This gets very complicated because there's so much history here to keep track of. So Solomon had turned the throne over to Rehoboam, and he was about to take the throne. But at that time, Jeroboam, who had been a leader in Solomon's government, gathered the people of the 10 northern tribes and went to Rehoboam and asked that Rehoboam reduce taxes, the taxes that had been imposed upon them by Solomon. Rehoboam said in 1 Kings 12:14, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." At this, the people of the northern tribes seceded from the United Kingdom and made Jeroboam their king. However, there's a sad ending to this, sadder even than the splitting of the United Kingdom. And that is that Jeroboam feared that the northern Israelites, when they went every year to the temple in Jerusalem, which was required by the laws of God, would start honoring Rehoboam, and he would become their king. And Jeroboam would be left on the side of the road, no longer a king. So he decided that he would lead his people into a new religion. 1 Kings 12:28 to 32a says, "After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves." Here we go with idols again. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar." So he created his whole own religion so as to be king. And this was an abomination to God. Many, many prophets warned over the centuries, over the next 2 centuries, that if Israel, the northern kingdoms, didn't return to God, that there would be trouble. And 200 years later, the northern kingdom was attacked by the Assyrians and defeated, and its people scattered throughout the Mesopotamian region. And the Assyrians brought new people in, mixed them in with the few that were left, and they brought in their pagan gods and their pagan religions. And it became what we know in the New Testament as Samaria. And we know that the Jews and the Samaritans could absolutely not get along because their religions were so different and because the Samaritans had turned away from the God Yahweh in honor of their king, and that had lasted for 200 years and more, because there still were, at that point, 700 years until Christ, and they were still Samaritans at the time of Christ, and not back to being the Jews worshiping God. So, from its beginning, Shechem was a land of good and a land of evil, a land of obedience to God and a land of rebellion against him. But again, isn't that how we are? I mean, not to that extreme maybe laid out in the Bible, but don't we turn away? Don't we have our issues? Don't we teeter back and forth between goodness and sinfulness? Aren't we tempted, and don't we sometimes succumb to those temptations? Don't we teeter in our devotion to God and our devotion to ourselves? So I ask you, are we any different from the people of Shechem? Well, yes, we are. And that's the good news. We are different from the people of Shechem. And the reason we're different from the people of Shechem is the one story that has Shechem in it in the New Testament. One story. It's the only time that Shechem is mentioned. And it isn't mentioned as Shechem because the name had changed. And by then it was Sychar. The story happens in the town of Sychar, at the site of the former city of Shechem. And you know the story. Jesus was traveling down to Jerusalem, and he stopped in Samaria. Even though Jews weren't supposed to go to Samaria, it's funny because Samaria was above Judea. And Jesus was from Galilee, which was a Jewish country, a Jewish land, not country, above Samaria. So to go from Galilee to Judea, you'd go straight down through Samaria. But because they wouldn't go in Samaria, they had to go all the way around along the Jordan River and over through Jericho and into Jerusalem, which added a long distance. You weren't supposed to go to Samaria. Well, Jesus went to Samaria because Jesus did a lot of rebellious type things, because he knew the rules of the day weren't necessarily the rules of God. So he went to Samaria, and he went to the city of Sychar. And let's read John 4, 6 to 10. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because not only were Jews, males, not supposed to talk to Samaritan people, but Jewish males were not supposed to talk to Jewish women or Samaritan women. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Living water. That's the difference between us and the Samaritans, the Shechemites. As the story continues, the Samaritan woman receives that living water. And so can we. And despite her sinful life, having had 5 husbands and then living with a man who was not her husband, she nevertheless found in Jesus forgiveness and the promise of eternal life. and so can we. Even in our sinfulness, when we teeter between the good and the not so good sides of us, even when the balance is on the not so good, Jesus is with us. And he's faithful in his forgiveness and his promise of eternal life. He offers it to us just as he did to this Samaritan woman. And like her, like all of the people in the stories about Shechem, we are two-sided and we continue to teeter, and yet Jesus still seeks us out. And he shows us another way. And that way is the only way, because Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. He is the only way and truth and life. And he alone can promise us eternal life and keep that promise. So I say today, turn to him. Give yourself to him. And if you do, he will love you. He will love you anyway, despite the teetering. And he will save you. That is his promise. Let us pray. Lord, we are just so grateful that you have made this promise and that we know you keep it. That if we put our trust in you, if we give our hearts to you, even though we may fight with temptation, even though we sometimes lose that fight, we know, Lord, that you are still a good and loving God and that you will keep your promise, that you will not leave us, that you will stand beside us, and that you will give us, when the time comes, eternal life with you in the heavenly kingdom. We thank you, Lord, and we pray this in your holy name. Amen.